But yeah, welcome, Ed. Thank you very much for joining. Yeah,
No, good to
yeah,
sit down and chat.
yeah. I appreciate you're very busy. Before we get going, it's probably worth just saying I don't know if you listened to last week's or this week's episode, but I believe Daniel from Integrated Finance has not been scammed. So for any repeat listeners, all is well. If you're curious, check out episode 6. But yeah, very happy, very glad to be sitting down with you, Ed, today. You are the Chief Operating Officer at Griffin. I know you're mega busy. It's not easy running an operation at a bank. Why don't we kick off by, why don't you explain to people, like, what is operations in banking? Yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks, Bo. It's good to chat, as I say. Yeah, operations in banking, that can be a really tricky one because I guess it's different whichever bank you turn up at. There are different pressures, different products, different incentives, just different customers to serve. Um, Fundamentally, though, it boils down to keeping the wheels turning alongside the technology platform, the product and engineering teams. Operations do a little bit of everything in terms of plugging the gaps, implementing the correct controls, pulling the right data in so we can generate reporting, conduct analysis and trending, understand what's happening in the bank, and then ultimately keep our stakeholders. And I use that term pretty broadly. Stakeholders, keep our customers, our internal partners, our regulators, all informed as to how the bank's operating, so we can then create a neat feedback loop to improve things, but also understand the business a little better ourselves, plan capacity, allocate people to the right functions, and then help our delivery partners automate things, essentially make things a little better every day.
Ed, this seems like a huge scope. How do you manage so many different things at once? And how do you get in? Do you get into the detail? Like how do you do it?
I guess I don't manage so many things all at once. I break it down into lots of little chunks and have an incredibly strong team around me, both at the exco level and within operations ourselves. So I can focus on making one capability as good as it possibly can be with the tools we've got at our disposal. Build it to such a level that I have a degree of confidence that it can be operated by those I know and trust, to such a level I can then go and pour my time and attention into the next thing that needs a bit of love and care and development. So yeah, there's no one individual carrying the can on anything we do. It's a genuine team effort, and you'll have seen yourself, Mo, from everything we do at Griffin. It's incredibly collaborative, and there's a huge amount of trust we place between the guilds, but within teams as well, to get things to a standard and then keep them at that standard and hopefully exceed it consistently. Because, as you know, nothing ever stands still here at Griffin. It's a constant iteration and strive
Yeah,
for excellence.
yeah, that makes sense. So is it kind of I mean it's kind of like you're you're having to prioritize on your on certain projects or focus areas and at the same time keep other areas running at like almost like a minimum viable level and then shifting focus like kind of one by one. Is that kind of rough
Yeah, and
summarization?
I mean that's fair to say that there are some fundamentals that have to be just 100% reliable all the
Yeah.
time. We
Okay.
need to be able to onboard customers, for example, consistently and repeatedly at scale, because we need to react to customer demand. If service or operations are acting as a bottleneck for key revenue generating activities or regulatory requirements, then something's gone pretty wrong. So the non-negotiables, we try and automate as much as we possibly can to reduce the human input. And then this is where experience and having the right knowledge around you really counts for something. A lot of it's not guesswork, it's estimates, it's forecasting based on what we know to be the case from similar customer types in the past, what we know to be the case from tangible data we've generated from customers to date. So if you look at, I don't know, payment exceptions, for example, whilst we can't predict the precise number of payment exceptions we're going to get every week, we've got a rough ballpark figure. When you put all those operational requirements together in aggregate, you can trust that on balance you're going to have enough capacity to deal with all those issues, whether it's a payment exception, a reconciliation issue, an overseas payment that you need to screen manually, whether it's an investigation, whether it's an inquiry from a regulator. Like, pretty much most of the time you can even it out. And when you can't even it out and things are getting a little bit hot, then we've planned contingencies and resiliencies. So we've trained individuals like yourself in other guilds who can help out on a temporary basis to alleviate those capacity concerns in that respect.
Wow. A lot of planning, a lot of coordination. Very, very, very interesting. How did you get into operations in banking? And maybe talk people through your background. I know a little bit, obviously, because I'm here, but I think it's fascinating, and I think people would really love to hear that.
Yeah, so yeah, as you know, Mo, I had quite an unusual route into banking. Well, unusual for some, in that straight out of university, I joined the military. So joined the army, went to Sandhurst, trained up, and then spent 8 years essentially going off to hot, dusty, sandy places to lead teams of guys essentially to carry out combat missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. Um, and my motivation behind that was nothing more complex than I just didn't want to sit behind a desk after I left uni. I thought there's plenty of time for that in my career, so I'm going to do something a little different. And it wasn't quite that blasé. I mean, it's well understood that for all its rights and wrongs, there's a lot of practical application and foundational leadership skill you can sort of incubate and learn in the military. Um, the military is an incredibly hierarchical organization, so it's not all applicable to my future career in banking, but there are some great sort of behaviors and traits that I've been able to carry forward, and kind of the big one for me was just the importance of values and how they show up in how you work, how you lead and manage teams, how you just develop and coach individuals. And it's something that wasn't top of my priority list when I joined the military, but by the time I left, it was definitely a consideration in my future career choice. So, yeah, after 8 years in the military, I jumped ship, joined a large American bank, and kind of cut my teeth in banking. And the thinking behind that was it was something quite challenging, quite punchy. I was going to be tested. So it just enabled me to apply those skills I've mentioned in a slightly different setting, with a view to giving myself a bit more flexibility in my future career choice, but also being able to get stuck into something quite punchy. So yeah, did 7.5 years at JP Morgan before kind of thinking, well, I could add a bit more here. I could build something a little more tangible. I could take those lessons, and had a brief stop off in another digital payments fintech before joining Griffin nearly 2 years ago now.
Wow, I can't believe it's been 2 years. Time really does
Yeah,
fly.
it does. It does. It really does.
Wow. I mean, if you don't mind sharing, Ed, how did you find that transition from a dusty desert to behind a desk?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think every veteran's been asked this question,
Mm.
and it's quite a boring answer because human nature is the same whether it's in the military, whether it's a corporate organisation, or whether it's a public sector body. It's that the principles of setting objectives, being clear about deliverables, helping someone develop themselves and bring in the right skills to be able to solve a problem. And that's essentially what any job is in my very simple, from my very simple mind, is problem solving. And the, the further you get into your career and the higher you climb up the ladder, you're just solving problems at a slightly different scale. And you've got, to be honest, you've got more resources at your disposal, so you're better able to react and solve to them. So the skills I carried over from the military, they almost mapped perfectly into the corporate world because you're still deploying resources to address an issue. You're setting deadlines, timelines. You're working to um, regulators or bodies that oversee your work. You've got an agenda set by, well, in the case of the military, the government, ultimately in the case of a bank like Griffin, set by our board and our executive committee. So the inputs are roughly comparable, the resources at your disposal are roughly comparable. All that really changes is kind of the people that you've got to deliver it, the skill sets and the tools you use. So instead of I don't know, getting a whole load of hardware and planes to ship people from one place to another in the military, you are working with product managers and engineers and finance teams to deploy cash and capability to build something new and exciting that works for the bank and its customers.
I think that the analogy is fascinating, and the way you put it is fascinating, and it kind of almost simplifies like a lot of things, like you say, about like objective setting and and deadlines and teamwork and helping each other out to deliver towards a common goal. I think it's a really nice, simple way to just look at different problems and solving
I think you've nailed it, Mo. Simple.
them.
Going from the military into a bank where I was already behind the curve. My peers had already had 8 years in banking, and they picked up all the kind of lingo, the abbreviations, but they'd also learnt the bad habits. And so I was joining in my first 6 months at JP. I was joining meetings, and people were talking in what seemed like a genuinely different language to me, because that didn't even translate bank to bank, or even within the bank. It was team specific, and there was so much jargon used. I was like, "What's going on here?" So I had to walk out of meetings, sit down with my notebook, and then go and ask people questions. Well, what does this mean? What does this mean in practice? And ultimately, it came down to, well, if I can explain this to my mother or someone who has absolutely no context, then I can understand that myself. And I know this is a sort of relatively cliche recommendation, but I still find those principles applicable today. If I'm sat round a table, whatever it is, and I can't understand what the person's explaining, then either they're doing a bad job of explaining it, or I'm doing a bad job of understanding it. Either way, we need to come to an agreement on what the problem is, so we can then work out what the solution will be. So keeping things simple is absolutely the name of the game in pretty much everything we do.
And I think it's really nice, actually, what you said for any veterans who are kind of going through that transition now, or anyone, shifting industry, to hear that the COO at Griffin, has had that kind of phase as well, where you've sat down in a meeting and you haven't understood. I know I was like that when I first joined Griffin. I'd never worked in banking before, and there's all these like people saying NIM, and I was like, NIM? Where do I look up this acronym? I was like, net interest margin. Right, okay, yeah, I get it now. But yeah, it's simple, a very good point, and especially in marketing in my world, that's another thing I often have to come back to, is like, rewind. How do I explain this simply to someone? What do you find? I mean, it's really interesting, Ed, because you've worked at JP, an incredible bank, huge global bank, and now Griffin, a startup bank. We've had our license for about a year, UK focused right now, until we hopefully expand our market sectors. But what's been like the key differences, and what are some of the like challenges of big bank and small bank?
This goes back to why I joined Griffin and got into fintechs to begin with. The problems don't really change. They're remarkably similar. They just exist on a different scale. And you look at an established bank, yes, they've got a ton of resource to be able to solve these problems, but the sheer size creates a layer of bureaucracy that makes it sort of that much harder to get things done. So the timescales by which problems get solved are much slower. Now, that's a bit of a generalization, but by and large, they're much slower. You've got to look much further ahead. At a place like Griffin, we're 100 people or so. We've got incredibly smart people who understand a lot of the context well beyond their core role. So I'm incredibly lucky in service or operations to work with engineering managers who understand the regulation. So it's a genuine partnership in delivering solutions. Um, and we work with a finance team who recognise that we're building quickly, but we're also building for the future. So if we are asking for resource, i.e. a budget to go and build something, we're asking for a reason. And a great example of this was reconciliations. So back end of last year, or back end of 2023, just before we launched, we were debating whether or not we should automate our reconciliation. Now, with my background in a large corporate bank, I was all too familiar with kind of the incredibly manual nature of reconciliation, despite a whole load of automation sitting in the background. And that was really a byproduct of just the sheer size at which they're operating, all the legacy infrastructure, the legacy of mergers and acquisitions and different businesses all being mashed together. And you've got a really complex data set that all needs a simple outcome, match your ledger to your statement. At Griffin, but we got the opportunity to design that from scratch without the pressure of operating a BAU business before we launched. So yes, we could have gone down the road of a manual process, but having the time and effort and resource dedicated to building something automated has served us so well. And this is kind of the flip side of building controls before you feel the pain. It's very difficult for me to explain to the rest of the organization how painful it would be if we didn't have these reconciliation controls in place. But that's what I was talking about, the trust earlier. We lean on people's experience at Griffin. People have experienced the pain of dealing with complex reconciliations, for example, know just how important it is to get on the front foot and nip it in the bud, and spend a month building a reconciliation engine that will set us up genuinely to scale exponentially. So you're talking 10,000, 100,000, 1 million accounts. We'll be able to handle that with the solution we've built. And I find that quite exciting, because designing things like that, controls like that with a blank sheet of paper, could go horribly wrong if you don't get it right. But as I say, we've got some really smart people at Griffin who put a lot of time and effort into getting it right first time round.
I think that is one of the reasons I joined as well, of how cool it is to be able to set this thing up in all its different aspects, whether it's reconciliation or something else, from scratch, and without that legacy infrastructure, without the kind of cost and time that it would take to unpick something that exists and then put it back together. Having said that, it is a startup environment. What would you say from your perspective are some of the key challenges? Maybe some of the challenges you're facing now or you faced in the last couple of years. How would you describe that? Maybe.
I mean, setting up a bank is an incredibly tough business, and I missed a lot of that pain, right? So as I say, I joined 2 years ago, just before we launched. Hats off to David and Alan for the sheer persistence in getting us to this point. It's genuine, incredible. And to your point, mate, you don't do that unless you just roll up your sleeves, wade through the detail in the regulation, and come up with something that doesn't necessarily need to be perfect first time round, but is flexible enough to adapt as you evolve your thinking as a bank. And our journey last year and our first year is kind of testament to that. We've got pricing strategies in place, we've got onboarding mechanisms in place, we've got automated solutions in place, all of which has kind of been tested against the reality of customers coming on board and doing their business with us. So we've necessarily had to evolve that. And you don't evolve it by pulling in experience from people who've done it before, because in some instances, no one's done some of this stuff before. We're genuinely pushing the boundaries and trying things that haven't been done before. So there's a bit of trial and error, but there's also a bit of informed, again, it's not guesswork, informed gut feel, just to try things that you kind of suspect are going to work and put us into a good place. What's been very cognizant of, well, if I push the boundaries too hard, then I'm going to break something. I'm potentially going to breach a regulatory constraint, something like that. So you do have to be careful. So it does knowing where your parameters are can help you be creative in the most controlled way possible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a really good point that especially in a heavily regulated industry like this, you have to know that parameter, that envelope, and then within that you can be creative, like you said. Um, yeah, it is really interesting as well how I think we've gone from a couple of years ago where we just launched or we were authorized at that point with going through the mobilization phase, and then the reality of like launching with customers and how that also, in my opinion, speeds up the feedback loop, and it's no longer kind of like informed guesswork, like you say, but it's like, oh, we now actually have tangible, concrete feedback, and we know if we change it in this way, this is probably going to happen. It's like having data, almost like creating your own data, having your own, um, having something to test things with. Yeah. Um, how do you see things evolving in operations in banking, and especially given like the fact that Griffin is such a like technology first bank, and we've built our own reconciliation. We've got our own kind of operations app sitting behind the scenes that our customers don't necessarily see. How do you see things evolving, and what kind of opportunities do you think this gives us, like going forward?
Yeah, I mean, one of the traditional complaints about operations in any bank is that they're a cost center, and you kind of want to make the minimum investment to keep the bank afloat, but you'd rather spend your money on customer-facing products and capabilities that generate revenue. Now, that's a bit of a, or can be a bit of a misnomer in that you do need to invest in operational capability to be able to scale effectively and then scale in a controlled manner. Because if you don't invest the time and effort in operational processes, then A, you're going to have to recruit more people, and B, you open up yourself to a whole load of operational risk that, yes, you operate with a degree of operational risk, and that's always going to be the case. But if you start opening yourself up to manual errors because you haven't got the appropriate controls in place, you can kind of get away with it depending on what process it is once or twice. But any more than that, and it's inexcusable, and you're failing the bank. So one of the challenges for us collectively is when, not how, but when we invest the resource in building those operational capabilities and controls. And you mentioned the operations app. It's our internal tool set essentially for operations to go and find customer data, interrogate a payment, conduct a reconciliation, generate a view on our ledger. And it's all fundamental to us operating the bank. It also puts the data in the hands of users who can interpret it and generate insights that help us build a better customer experience, build better products, run them more efficiently. So judging when we automate certain capabilities is really important, and we do that hand in hand with the business. So there's no point for us investing a whole load of time and effort into something that needs to be automated if it's not going to be used meaningfully by customers for another 6, 12, 18 months. So one of the less tangible skills, but very important amongst the operations managers, is spotting those early warning signs when you think a process is going to come under pressure, but you've still got time and space to automate or control it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I guess especially at a startup when like you have so many things that could happen, knowing it's a bit like when product managers say it's like a prioritization thing. I guess it's not too dissimilar in an operation sense, but it's dealing with a different type of product almost.
And,
Yeah,
and that's the benefit of being a smaller organization, that
right.
I am closer to the commercial pipeline than I ever would have been in a larger bank. So I can see customers coming all the way through from the pipeline, all the way from those initial inquiries that hit you, working through the client solutions to developing something that they can use, pricing it up, and then releasing it. Now, whilst we can do that very quickly, it also enables me to prepare to be able to support that. So if we've got customers, if we've got a load of customers who are coming down the pipeline with a huge back book that they want to migrate onto our platform, I can see couple of months, maybe even a quarter ahead of time, that yes, we're going to have to deal with this migration, then we can train up other people to help support that in the short term. Or if we really need to, we can recruit people permanently to come and provide that capacity to help us run the bank. But yeah, that insight into things like the commercial pipeline and even the product development roadmap enable me in operations to position us as effectively as possible to run those when we need to.
I mean, just as you're saying this, it makes me think there's such a forward-looking aspect to your role. Like you're constantly almost like looking 2 or 3 steps ahead to foresee like where are the capacity constraints, where are the bottlenecks, how can we make things more efficient, and it's almost like you're matching supply and demand, and like it's yeah, just in
The,
an operation sense, yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
there's a bit of that, and a crystal ball would be fantastic. There's also a huge element of contingency planning. So just
Okay.
being flexible and adaptable. And you touched on what skills you need in a startup. It's
Mm.
that ability to switch hats very quickly, switch context very quickly, and go from dealing with a customer activation issue to I don't know, like a future product capability development
Yeah.
to operational tooling to supporting a marketing campaign to a fundraise. It's that ability to switch context rapidly and then add value and string it all together so it all delivers a cohesive service to our customers at the end of it is really important and ultimately really exciting as well, because it keeps things varied, and it means you're constantly being pushed and tested.
Do you find that because of Griffin's business model, because we're powering someone else to offer a financial product to their customers, and hence that could be so many different use cases, whether it's property or an EMI offering an e-wallet type of product or a FX company. Like, do you find that variation, obviously, like you just said, it's very exciting, but does that put like a real strain on an operations team at a bank?
I, th- I wouldn't say it puts a strain on the
Yeah,
operations team. It places a requirement on us to be
right.
flexible and adaptable. Um, I don't think anyone who's ever worked in an operations team would pretend that anything else was needed. But
Yeah.
fundamentally, our products and capabilities don't change. We are a bank offering banking products now. The channels by which we deliver those products to our
Yeah.
customers are slightly different to your conventional retail
Yeah.
bank, but ultimately, what we need to deliver as a service doesn't really
Mm,
change. How we deliver it does. We
mm,
talked about the platform and the need for automation earlier, but the outputs are
yeah.
pretty constant.
Right. Right. Yeah. Again, I love how you've just simplified. It's like, um, yeah. I mean, from my perspective, sometimes it's like, oh my God, we're supporting all these different sectors. It's so varied, and that's why, like I said again, that's why I'm here, and I love it. But yeah, I love how you can condense things and simplify them. Um, and it's really fascinating for me personally, especially. I'd never worked in a bank with an operations team. I didn't know just how much an operations team does. And I think one of our colleagues said the other day, he's worked at a lot of banks, and he said you run the operations team more smoothly than any other that he's seen. Um, and I love the fact that you're so curious about, yeah, the commercial pipeline or the marketing campaigns, etc. Again, I think that's quite rare. But it's been amazing to chat, and I hope it's super useful for other operations people and people generally in fintech and banking out there. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you, Ed.
Excellent. Thanks, Mo.
Thank you.